Joining me on Zoom today is John Oliver, the candidate for the Ward 1 Councilor-at-Large for the special election coming up on March 16th. John, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time for us to get to know you just a little bit better.
Sure, no, I really appreciate the time, Jen. Thanks so much.
So my first question is basically, why are you running?
Yeah, great question. Super important. And I think there are a few reasons, quite frankly, that got me to the point of running for city council. In no particular order, I started to notice some odd decisions being made here in Newton about 2 years ago. I think a lot of people are familiar with the process that the city's gone through in designing the new senior center, or New Cal. And I really got involved in that conversation when the city wanted to build or site the new senior center in the middle of Albemarle Field, which I thought was a really that was a bit of a head scratcher for me. That one didn't make sense to me. So that really got me kind of on this track. And since then, in paying much, much more attention to what's been going on, what I've found is there are a lot of residents, a lot of taxpayers here in Newton who don't feel like they're being involved in the process. They feel ignored, perhaps as a group, their interests aren't being met, or their individual voices aren't even being included in the conversation. And I think that that's a really big challenge. And I hope we get to talk about a little bit more about that today. And I think it's also important to note that residents here are really, really passionate about Newton and all the things going on here. And sometimes those passions can get really divisive. And I'd like to contribute to the process by which we can try and make those conversations, or turn that passion and channel that passion into something a little bit more productive, ideally. So those are the primary reasons that I'm running, that I'm in the race.
So could you tell me a little bit about what your top priorities are?
Sure, absolutely. And I think I just mentioned one of my top priorities, or I led into it, because there's a lot of work in front of us. We have some significant challenges in front of us, everything from COVID-19 to climate change to affordable housing and getting our schools open and so on and so forth. But really, I think the key that kind of ties all of these together is really based on engagement and participation. Because we have so much that needs to be done, and we're going to have to be doing these things simultaneously, it's going to be really important that we continue to work together in productive ways, collaboratively, in order to make things work for as many people in the city as we can. And from my perspective, that's a common thread between everything we need to get accomplished. And as I just mentioned, from an issues perspective, certainly the recovery from COVID-19 is critical, right? That is imminent and incredibly pressing, not only from a health and safety perspective, but economically as well. Certainly climate change is something that Newton is doing, has started. We've got a fantastic climate action plan. Now we need to turn that into action and results. As well as affordable housing. We have a plan for that. I'd like to see us kind of revisit that plan a little bit and get a little bit more quantitative about it. But those are just a few of the priorities that I'm paying very close attention to. I mean, that's the majority of my time. That's where my attention is right now.
What kind of background experience do you have to help, achieve those priorities? For instance, in affordable housing, do you have any experience in that area?
Right. No, great questions. Affordable housing as a specific area of focus. My experience in that space is, or has been, focused on everything I've been learning by attending all the ZAP meetings and all of the reading and everything that's been going on, not only in Newton, but in the region, in Eastern Massachusetts over the past couple of years. But I believe that I bring a perspective and a level of experience to the job that I think is going to be critical. And I mean that from the perspective of a couple of different directions. Number one, this is as a homeowner, a taxpayer here in Newton, just being able to do what I need to be able to do here in my own house to do what we can about climate change. Everything from working with mass saves to getting my house insulated, replacing the windows with high efficiency windows, installing heat pumps in our house, planning out when we're going to move over to an electric vehicle. Things of these nature are critical to understand, because we're going to have to motivate every resident and small business in Newton to participate in Newton's climate action plan. And I also believe that my professional experience, I'm a consultant by day, don't hold that against me, but I've spent a long time working with my clients on complex challenges that require multiple years worth of solutions and some very specific tactics. And what I've learned is you've got to work with all of your different constituencies and their agendas to bind them together in a way that they're pulling for the solutions, that you've created demand for the solutions, that people are actively participating in the solutions, as opposed to just using, it's the carrot and the stick philosophy. I'm much more inclined to reach for the carrot than the stick. And I've got a lot of experience in how to do that. And I'd like to bring that to bear here in Newton.
John, in what areas do you think the city council has done well? And have you worked with the city council in any areas of, input or anything like that?
Certainly, absolutely. And I think it's really important to recognize that Newton's a great place to live, and that's not that didn't happen by accident. So as a starting point, I think we've done a fantastic job here in Newton. I think that we've done a fantastic job in our planning and our strategic outlook. I mean, Newton has multiple strategies. We have a comprehensive plan. I've mentioned our climate action plan. We have a transportation plan. We have a plan for open spaces and recreational planning, or OSRP. All of that information exists. And a couple of the places where I think we can do better is, while we have all of those plans and those strategies written down, I'm not quite sure that those are driving or considered when we turn our attention to tactics, to getting something done, to action. I mentioned earlier the NewCal project. We did a fantastic job of us as a city in defining what we needed from that program. How, what types of services, what types of facilities do we need? And then when it came to, well, okay, where do we want to put that facility? We completely ignored the criteria that the city had created that would define, the ideal location in terms of, public transportation, access to amenities really close to the facility. Is it walkable? Is it centrally located within the city? Those types of criteria were well acknowledged, were well researched, well documented, and then completely ignored when they chose Albemarle as the location for NewCal, because it didn't meet any of those criteria. And then, in terms of, and I'd also be remiss in not mentioning that I think one of the biggest blunders of the past, 12 to 13, maybe 14 months was not being able to get our schools opened earlier. As a parent, that's been a really big concern of mine. So I think that's one area where we could have done significantly better. And the one area that I would point out that I would like to think I had some influence anyway was in the NewCal project, in helping recognize, at a city level and working with COA and the project team in charge of, the entire NewCal project, was helping them to understand, look, guys, not only do I think it's a bad idea to build on a park, any park, your own criteria say that that's a bad idea. So we should be rethinking this. And I think that as a city, as a process, what we ended up creating there was a misstep that could have been avoided. And what it ended up doing was really generating a lot of negative sentiment. There were a lot of people really, really upset because of the idea of building in the middle of a park. And I think that that's one area where I think the city can continue to do a better job as well.
You're running against one of the youngest candidates. So how do you differ from your opponent?
Sure, I think that's a great question. As you mentioned, I have one opponent in this race, and we literally live next door to each other. My wife and I have been living here for it's about 14 years now. So when we moved in, my opponent, Maddie Rinaldi, and her family lived right next door. So that's kind of added another dimension to this entire process. But this has been it's the first time I've ever run for public office. It's been eye-opening in a lot of different ways, and I think living next door to my opponent is one of those dimensions. It's been really, really interesting. But two of the areas that I think are critical differences between myself and my opponent, and they boil down to my experience base. As I've mentioned before, 25 years working in professional services, learning how to build consensus, how to help people understand how to align their agenda to the solutions that we need in order to move our city forward. And I also think that there's another area that I think is really important is my opponent and I come at the solutions that we're thinking about and how we see how the process might work. My resume as far as being a city councilor is completely focused on Newton, right? I've worked with as co-president in 2 PTOs, soccer coach here locally, founding member of Newton Athletic Fields Foundation, appointed board member at Newton Community Ed. It's Newton, and it's more Newton. I want to see Newton be outrageously successful. I think that my opponent has gotten some great experience on issues that are more nationally centered. And I want to make sure that, as a city council as a whole, we're focused on everything Newton first. And that's how we're going to succeed as a city. And I think that's mission critical. And I think there's probably, one other difference between my opponent and myself is I see, as I mentioned earlier, I think that Newton has a lot more right than we have wrong. This is a fantastic place to live. There's certainly room for improvement. My perspective is let's build on what we've gotten right and adjust and improve the areas where we see the need for improvement. We need to be able to grow. We need to be able to modernize. But I think we have a fantastic foundation from which we can build on that or build towards even greater success. I think my opponent in some places is looking to kind of undo a lot of the things that are good to redo things in a different way. And I believe we can work from the foundation that we already have. It's a great place to live. Been here for 18 years, and every year people find one more reason to stay here, raise their families here. It's a great place.
Well, thanks for that information. And of course, we only just barely touched on any of your priorities or really anything about you because we only have a limited time. But how can someone find out more information about you, perhaps contact you? How can someone do that?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. Well, obviously, anyone can email us. The email address is John with an H at John Oliver 4 Newton.org, or they can visit our website, right? And there's a contact form on the website as well. And the website is, Dubs, John Oliver, again, the number 4 Newton.org. And thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I really welcome everyone's questions and comments because, as I mentioned before, this has been a fantastic learning process for me and getting to know a lot more of the residents here in Newton and what's on their mind. This has been fantastic.
I'm sure win or lose, we'll be seeing you more around town then.
I think so.
Well, thank you so much, John. And don't forget, you still have time to do early voting. And of course, on March 16th is the special election, so you can certainly vote that way as well. Thanks again, John. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll see you after the election.